My wife ignored every message all day. At 11 p.m., she finally came home smirking. Want to know what happened? I slept with my boss and I'd do it again. I calmly finished my dinner without a word. I did not throw my plate or demand an explanation. I simply nodded, finished chewing my dinner, and realized that my marriage had ended before she even took off her coat. For most of that evening, I had been sitting alone in our dim kitchen, pushing leftover fried rice around my plate while the clock above the stove seemed to grow louder with every passing minute. Vanessa had not answered my calls or texts since that morning. I had tried not to assume the worst, but after years of marriage, you learn the difference between an ordinary delay and the kind of silence that warns you something is wrong. When the clock reached 11, the front door finally opened. Her heels clicked down the hallway with slow, deliberate confidence, as though she had rehearsed the entrance in her car. She was wearing the beige trench coat she usually chose whenever she wanted to look composed and important. It was also the coat she had worn years earlier, when she promised that honesty would always matter in our marriage. That memory crossed my mind just before she tossed her purse onto the counter and released a theatrical sigh. She did not look directly at me. Her eyes hovered somewhere above my head, treating me less like her husband and more like an inconvenience she had been avoiding all day. Then she gave me that smirk. "You know what happened tonight?" she asked. I kept eating. Part of me wondered whether she was drunk, angry, or simply looking for a reaction. Her tone was too casual for good news and too sharp for an apology. When I did not answer immediately, she folded her arms and said, "I had a one-night stand with my boss, and honestly, I would do it again." The kitchen became so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator cycling behind me. I had imagined many explanations for her behavior, but I had not expected her to confess so openly or so cruelly. For a few seconds, my mind seemed to separate from my body. I noticed absurd details: a grain of rice stuck to the edge of my plate, condensation sliding down my water glass, the tiny scratch on the counter we had argued about fixing. Beneath the shock, something in me went still. I understood that she was not confessing, because guilt had overwhelmed her. She was trying to hurt me. She wanted me to yell, plead, demand that she choose me, or collapse in front of her. Any emotional explosion would allow her to make the moment about my reaction instead of her betrayal. I refused to give her that escape. I swallowed, took a sip of water, and nodded once. "Congratulations," I said. Her smirk disappeared. "That's it? What else were you expecting? You're not going to fight for me?" I looked at her carefully. "Fight for what, Vanessa? You just told me you slept with your boss and would happily do it again. That does not sound like someone asking to save a marriage." For the first time since she entered the room, uncertainty appeared on her face. She had prepared herself for anger, not calm. She shifted her weight, glanced toward the hallway, and muttered that she needed space. Then she walked into our bedroom and slammed the door. I stayed at the table. I was furious, but the anger felt strangely organized. It was no longer the wild fear of not knowing what was happening. Her confession had given me clarity. I knew what she had done, how little remorse she felt, and what I needed to protect. While she moved around behind the closed bedroom door, I began mentally listing our accounts: insurance policies, subscriptions, devices, documents, and shared obligations. It was not revenge yet. It was survival. She believed she had detonated a bomb in our home. What she did not understand was that I had no intention of standing in the wreckage waiting for her to decide what happened next. A few minutes later, she came back into the kitchen with her face washed and her hair tied up. She had changed into one of my old shirts, as though appearing vulnerable might restore the balance she had just destroyed. "You're still not saying anything," she said. "You don't even care." "Care is expensive," I replied. "I'm going to be more careful about where I spend it." Her eyes narrowed. "You're unbelievable." I stood, picked up my plate, and carried it to the sink. "I imagine your boss said something similar." That landed harder than I expected. She turned away, stomped back toward the bedroom, and slammed the door a second time. I rinsed my plate and loaded it into the dishwasher. Then I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the situation had become so absurd that laughter was the only response that did not feel like surrender. I poured myself a drink, switched on the television, and landed on a late-night program where a man with unnaturally white teeth was saying that a person's life could change with one decision. I raised my glass toward the screen. Mine already had. Around midnight, I heard Vanessa crying behind the bedroom door. They were not loud sobs. They were quiet, uneven sounds, the kind that might have pulled me into the room on any other night. In the past, I had always been the one to comfort her, even after arguments she had started. I would sit beside her, reassure her, and accept apologies that rarely changed anything. That night, I remained on the other side of the door. Her tears might have been guilt, fear, humiliation, or frustration that I had refused to perform for her. Whatever they meant, they were no longer my responsibility to interpret. I went into the home office, opened my laptop, and created a spreadsheet. I called it Operation Goodbye Vanessa. The name was dramatic, but organizing the chaos gave me something solid to hold on to. I listed every shared account and every account that belonged solely to me. I wrote down which bills were automatic, whose name appeared on each contract, and where our important documents were stored. I made separate sections for the mortgage, vehicle lease, insurance, utilities, retirement accounts, streaming services, cloud storage, and even our warehouse club membership. I did not transfer money or lock her out of anything she legally owned. I knew enough to understand that impulsive financial retaliation could hurt me later. Instead, I documented balances, downloaded statements, and changed passwords only on my personal accounts. I enabled transaction alerts on the joint accounts so I would know if large sums suddenly moved. The work was tedious, but it also steadied me. Heartbreak was vague and uncontrollable. A list had boxes I could check. When I finished the first draft, I noticed our wedding photograph on the bookshelf. We were standing on a beach, smiling at the camera with the confidence of two people who believed promises could protect them from change. For a moment, grief pushed through the numbness. I remembered how certain I had been that Vanessa was my person. I remembered bringing her coffee in bed, planning birthdays, sitting beside her through illnesses, and building a home around the assumption that we were working toward the same future. I picked up the photograph and placed it face down. I was not trying to erase the past. I simply could not keep staring at a version of us that no longer existed. The house felt unnaturally quiet. I sat on the couch, and Baxter, our dog, climbed up beside me. He rested his head against my leg and looked at me with the patient concern only dogs seem capable of expressing. I scratched behind his ears and told him, "Looks like we're downsizing the drama." His tail thumped against the cushion. That small sound helped more than it should have. The confession had wounded me, but I was still standing. Vanessa had given me something painful and valuable at the same time: certainty. I no longer had to wonder whether I was imagining the distance between us. I no longer had to convince myself that her secrecy was harmless. Whatever came next, I would face facts instead of excuses. I slept on the couch and woke shortly after 7 with a stiff neck and the memory of her confession returning before I was fully conscious. Betrayal did not wake me like a dramatic slap. It arrived as a dull pressure in my chest and a cramp in my shoulder. I went into the kitchen and made coffee strong enough to compensate for both. The machine had barely finished when I heard Vanessa calling from the bedroom. "Coffee, please." Her voice was casual and expectant, as though the previous night had been an argument about laundry. For years, I had carried coffee to her in bed, sometimes adding foam or drawing a crooked heart on top, because she used to laugh when I tried. That morning, I poured 1 cup for myself and stood in the bedroom doorway. She looked up. "Where's mine?" "You want the one-night stand special?" I asked. "Black, bitter, and served cold?" Her face tightened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "I think you remember." She sat up and pulled the blanket around herself. "You're still angry about last night?" "Still? It happened 8 hours ago. You confessed to sleeping with your boss, told me you would do it again, and went to sleep." "I was drunk. Alcohol may have removed your filter. It did not invent the affair." For a second, she looked ashamed. Then the defensiveness arrived. She said I had been distant, that work consumed too much of my time, and that she had felt ignored. The shift was so predictable that I almost admired the speed of it. Within minutes, her betrayal had become evidence of my failure. "So, you felt neglected?" I said. "And your solution was to sleep with your supervisor?" "You are twisting my words. I'm repeating the part that matters. You made me feel unwanted." "I did not make you cheat. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me, suggested counseling, or left. You chose the one option that guaranteed maximum damage." She accused me of being childish. I went back to the kitchen, poured coffee into a second mug, and returned with it. I left out the sugar and cream she normally preferred. "There," I said. "Your morning dose of consequences." She took a sip, immediately grimaced at the bitterness, and placed the mug on the bedside table. "You're being dramatic." "No, I'm finally being accurate." We stared at each other until she looked away. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "I made a mistake. Last night you called it something you would repeat. Can we not do this first thing in the morning?" I did not realize betrayal had office hours. She swung her legs out of bed and walked toward the bathroom. "I do not have time for this." "Of course. You need to get to work. It would be terrible to keep your boss waiting." Her hand froze on the bathroom door. When she turned, anger had replaced the shame. "You are not funny." "I disagree. You just stopped enjoying my sense of humor around the same time you stopped respecting our marriage." She slammed the bathroom door. The sound echoed through the hallway. but it did not frighten me. For months, I had felt as though I were drowning in confusion. That morning, I realized the water had been shallow enough to stand in. I returned to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Vanessa's carefully labeled meal prep containers were stacked on the top shelf. I pulled out the tuna salad she had marked for Tuesday, checked that none of the ingredients would harm Baxter, and mixed a small portion into his breakfast. He wagged his tail as though he had inherited an estate. "Enjoy it," I told him. "At least one of us is eating without guilt." Vanessa dressed in silence. Every movement carried the posture of someone trying to appear offended rather than caught. She grabbed her purse, avoided my eyes, and headed toward the front door. Before she left, I lifted the mug she had abandoned. "You forgot this." She turned. "I thought you might want it. It matches the apology." She stared at me, unable to decide whether to argue. Then she left and slammed the door. The silence that followed felt different from the silence of the night before. It no longer felt like waiting for disaster. It felt like space. I cleaned the kitchen, opened the Notes app on my phone, and added 3 lines. Mental detachment in progress. Documentation started. Legal advice needed. I understood that I was not fully detached, and probably would not be for a long time. But writing it down gave the pain direction. I spent the rest of the morning securing my personal digital life. I changed the password on my email, enabled 2-factor authentication, removed old devices from my cloud account, and updated the login for subscriptions billed solely to my card. I changed the password on the streaming account I paid for and removed Vanessa's profile. I disconnected her access to my shopping account and changed the smart home assistant's voice and wake word. Renaming the system Consequences was unnecessary, but it made me laugh when the speaker responded in a deep voice. I did not touch her private accounts, impersonate her, or try to access anything I was not authorized to view. Even angry, I knew there was a line between protecting myself and creating legal problems. At 10 that morning, I called my closest friend, Caleb Ortiz. He worked in information security and believed every crisis could be improved by stronger passwords, encrypted backups, or tacos. He answered cheerfully and asked how married life was treating me. "Technically, it may have expired last night," I said. There was a pause. "What happened?" My wife informed me that her professional development program includes sleeping with her boss. Caleb stopped joking. "Are you safe?" "I'm not in physical danger. I'm just trying to make sure I don't wake up tomorrow and discover our savings vanished." "Do not move joint money without advice," he said. "Download records, secure your personal accounts, and call a lawyer." That practical response was exactly why I trusted him. He offered to come over, but I told him I could handle the morning. Before we hung up, he said, "Do not do anything clever, just because it feels satisfying." I'm building a spreadsheet. That is the most predictable thing you could have said. By noon, Vanessa texted, "We need to talk tonight." I stared at the message, then replied, "I agree," after I have received legal advice. It was less amusing than the sarcastic answer in my head, but it was safer. For the first time since her confession, I was thinking beyond the next 5 minutes. She had acted as though our marriage were a game of provocation. I was going to treat its ending as a serious financial and legal process. That afternoon, Caleb arrived with his laptop and a container of queso. He reviewed the devices connected to my personal accounts, helped me create encrypted backups of the documents I had downloaded, and confirmed that 2-factor authentication was working. When he saw the spreadsheet, he leaned back and stared at me. "You categorized emotional damage. It provides context. You also used conditional formatting. Heartbreak requires structure." He laughed, but he also made sure I understood what not to do. I could protect my own credentials, preserve records, and remove access to services I alone paid for. I could not break into Vanessa's accounts, delete her files, hide marital assets, or interfere with her employment. When I opened her public social media page and saw a photograph of coffee and a croissant beneath the caption, "Self-care is not selfish," Caleb shook his head. "That bracelet in the picture?" he said. "Isn't that the anniversary gift you bought her?" I looked closer. It was. "She accessorized the affair," I muttered. Caleb asked whether I wanted him to access her account and search for messages. His tone made it clear he was testing me more than offering. "No," I said. "We stay on the legal side of this." Good answer. We spent the next several hours backing up tax returns, mortgage statements, insurance records, and account histories that were already available through our shared household files. I photographed the condition of valuable property in the house and created an inventory. Caleb helped me store copies on an encrypted drive and in a secure cloud folder. By sunset, my spreadsheet showed which items had been documented, which questions required legal advice, and which accounts needed continued monitoring. Green meant complete, yellow meant pending, and red meant do not touch without a lawyer. When Caleb left, I sat alone in the office and looked at the glowing spreadsheet. Each row represented something I could verify, rather than something I had to fear. At the bottom, I added a private note. She expected me to crumble. I am going to calculate. Then I printed a copy and placed it in a folder beside our marriage certificate. The certificate looked strangely fragile compared with the records surrounding it. A marriage could begin with signatures and promises, but ending one required statements, filings, disclosures, and patience. I checked the joint bank account again and saw a recent charge for $87.50 at the Ember Lounge. It was a downtown bar. Vanessa had never mentioned to me. I downloaded the statement and added the transaction to the timeline. I did not yet know whether it was connected to her boss, but after her confession, ignoring it would have been foolish. I searched for family law attorneys and found Rebecca Sloan, whose website focused on high-conflict divorces and financial documentation. Her office biography was direct and professional, without promises of revenge or guaranteed victories. I sent a request for a consultation and attached a brief summary of the situation. The next morning, Vanessa behaved as though we were inconveniencing each other, rather than confronting the end of our marriage. She asked why the shared credit card had sent a security notification. I explained that I had enabled alerts after her confession, and that no transactions had been blocked. She accused me of monitoring her. "It is a joint account," I said. "Both of us are entitled to see the activity." "You are trying to control me." "No, I am trying to understand where shared money is going." She muttered that I was paranoid and left for work. A few hours later, Rebecca's office called and offered an appointment. I gathered the spreadsheet, printed statements, screenshots of Vanessa's confession texts from that morning, and notes documenting the verbal admission. I knew a written record of my own recollection was not the same as independent proof, but creating it while the memory was fresh mattered. Rebecca's office smelled faintly of coffee and lavender sanitizer. Diplomas and professional certificates covered one wall, while the rest of the room was surprisingly plain. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair, a dark suit, and the calm expression of someone who had heard every version of marital disaster. She shook my hand, invited me to sit, and said, "Start at the beginning. Give me facts first and interpretations second." That instruction immediately reassured me. I described Vanessa's absence, her confession, the joint finances, and the Ember Lounge charge. Rebecca asked specific questions. Whether we had children, whose names were on the deed and vehicle lease, whether either of us owned property before the marriage, whether we had combined inherited or premarital funds, and whether there were signs that Vanessa was spending shared money on the affair. She also asked whether I feared violence or the destruction of documents. I told her no. When I opened the spreadsheet, Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "This is unusually organized." I was trying not to lose my mind. "Organization is useful. Retaliation is not. Do not empty accounts, cancel necessary insurance, damage her credit, or remove her from the home without a lawful order. Preserve records and continue paying ordinary expenses until we review everything." That advice removed several tempting but dangerous ideas from my mind. Rebecca explained that infidelity alone would not automatically give me every marital asset. What could matter, depending on the evidence and local law, was whether Vanessa had spent marital funds on the affair, concealed transactions, violated financial duties, or attempted to dissipate property. The house and vehicle would be evaluated according to title, contributions, debt, and the overall division of property. There would be filings, disclosures, negotiation, and possibly a hearing. Nothing would be resolved by one dramatic conversation. "I do not need revenge," I told her. "I want protection and a clean exit." "That is a much better goal," she said. "People who focus on punishment often damage their own case." We reviewed the mortgage, deed, vehicle documents, and bank statements. The house had been purchased primarily with funds traceable to my premarital savings, though marital income had contributed to later payments. The vehicle lease and primary insurance were in my name, while Vanessa was an authorized driver. The joint credit card had been opened using my income and credit history, but she was an authorized user. Rebecca said those facts did not decide the outcome by themselves, but they gave us a basis to request temporary financial protections while the case proceeded. She prepared the initial divorce petition and a request for temporary orders, preventing either of us from moving large sums, selling property, changing beneficiaries, or creating unusual debt. She advised me to redirect my future salary into a new personal account, while continuing to deposit enough into the joint account to cover documented household expenses. That would stop new income from being casually spent without concealing or stealing existing marital funds. She also recommended removing Vanessa as an authorized user from my personal credit line after giving formal notice, provided ordinary necessities remained covered through the joint account. Silence is not forgiveness, Rebecca said as we reviewed the documents. But it also should not become a trap. Let the filings speak for you. I signed what was ready and left with a list of actions I could legally take. Driving home, I felt lighter. The affair still hurt, but I was no longer improvising. I had professional guidance, preserved records, and a realistic understanding that the process would take time. When I arrived home, Vanessa texted, "Why did my card decline at the grocery store?" The message referred to the personal credit card on which she had been an authorized user. Rebecca's office had already sent the required notice that her access was ending. The joint household card remained active for ordinary expenses. I replied, "Your authorization on my personal card ended today. Use the joint household account for necessary expenses." The written notice explains everything. She called immediately. I let it ring, then listened to the voicemail. Her voice was tight and angry. She said I was humiliating her and demanded that I restore the card. I forwarded the message to Rebecca and did not respond further. 10 minutes later, Vanessa texted again, claiming she needed the card at a pharmacy. I checked the joint account and saw that it had sufficient funds. I answered only, "The joint card remains available for necessary purchases." It was not the sarcastic revenge fantasy I might have enjoyed, but it was legally clean. More importantly, it forced Vanessa to confront a new reality. The conveniences I had provided were not permanent entitlements. That evening, Caleb called and asked how the consultation had gone. "Rebecca Sloan is terrifyingly competent," I said. "Good terrifying or bad terrifying?" She stopped me from doing at least 5 things that would have felt wonderful and looked terrible in court. That is why lawyers exist. She also liked the spreadsheet. Of course she did. You turned betrayal into project management. Over the next few days, Rebecca's office filed the necessary paperwork, and Vanessa was formally served. I was not present when it happened, but she came home carrying the documents with both hands, as though they were radioactive. Her expression shifted between disbelief and fury. "You actually filed? You told me you would repeat the affair." I was angry. "You were specific. You never even gave us a chance to talk. I asked you whether there was anything left to fight for. You went to bed." She dropped the papers on the counter. "This is cruel." "No, this is the consequence of taking you seriously." Vanessa accused me of planning everything behind her back. I reminded her that I had told her I was seeking legal advice. She said she had expected me to calm down. That sentence revealed more than she intended. She had not believed I would leave. She had assumed I would absorb the pain, compete for her attention, and eventually restore the life she had disrupted. "You thought I would be angry enough to entertain you but not strong enough to end this," I said. Her face changed. "That is not fair." "Neither was your confession." She took the paperwork into the bedroom and closed the door. For the next week, we lived in the same house under temporary boundaries recommended by our attorneys. I slept in the guest room rather than the couch. We communicated mostly by text about bills, groceries, and schedules. I did not ask where she went after work, but I continued receiving transaction alerts and preserving records. Several charges appeared at restaurants, bars, and a hotel near her office. Because the expenses came from the joint account, Rebecca advised me to document them and avoid confrontation until we had more information. I contacted Nathan Cho, a certified public accountant recommended by Caleb. Nathan specialized in tracing marital and separate funds. When I emailed him the spreadsheet, he called within 15 minutes. "I have seen organized clients," he said. "I have never seen one rank transactions by emotional damage." It helped during the first night. I am leaving that column out of the formal report. Probably wise. Nathan reviewed years of statements, property records, mortgage payments, and credit card activity. He identified which funds could be traced to my premarital savings and which had become marital through commingling. He also flagged a pattern of charges that appeared unrelated to household expenses. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, rideshare trips, gifts, and Cash App payments to an account linked to Vanessa's boss, Victor Lang. The amounts were not enough to bankrupt us, but together they formed a clear pattern. Nathan told me not to assume what every payment meant. His job was to establish dates, sources, and destinations. Rebecca would decide how the information fit into the legal case. Having professionals separate facts from emotion was humbling. In my mind, every charge felt like proof of betrayal. Legally, each item required context and verification. We preserved original statements and downloaded transaction histories directly from the financial institutions. Nathan created a clean timeline showing when money left the accounts and how those dates corresponded with Vanessa's claimed late meetings and work retreats. I kept copies in the encrypted folder and gave Rebecca access through a secure portal. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued posting polished photographs online. One afternoon, she uploaded a picture of a croissant, a designer bracelet, and a cup of coffee with another caption about healing. I did not comment. I did not send it to her family. I saved only what might document spending or dates, and then closed the page. Watching her public performance did nothing for my recovery. Every time I looked, I felt pulled back into the role she wanted me to play. The jealous husband reacting to each new provocation. I was trying to become something else, a man making decisions based on evidence rather than adrenaline. About a week after the filing, Vanessa announced that she had another late meeting. She wore a fitted black dress she once saved for anniversaries and used enough perfume to leave the hallway smelling like a department store. Before leaving, she leaned toward me and kissed the air beside my cheek. "Do not wait up," she said. "I won't." Her confidence made me suspicious, but I did not follow her that night. Instead, I told Rebecca about the repeated hotel and bar charges and asked whether independent evidence of the affair would matter. She said it might support the claim that marital funds had been misused, but warned me not to trespass, install tracking software, record private conversations unlawfully, or harass anyone. If I gathered information in public, I needed to remain within the law and avoid confrontation. The following week, Vanessa again claimed she had a late meeting. This time, I decided to confirm whether the Ember Lounge transactions involved Victor. I rented an ordinary gray sedan because using my own vehicle would make me immediately recognizable. Even with Rebecca's warnings in mind, I understood how ridiculous the situation was. I was a grown man in a baseball cap sitting near my wife's office, trying to determine whether her late meeting was real. I told myself I would observe only from public areas, leave if anyone noticed me, and avoid any interaction. At 6:42, Vanessa walked out of the building beside Victor. He was a middle-aged executive with an expensive suit, a retreating hairline, and the confidence of a man accustomed to being treated as important. They were standing close enough that the nature of their relationship was obvious before either touched the other. Victor placed his hand against the lower part of Vanessa's back as they crossed the street. She did not move away. They entered his silver sedan and drove downtown. I followed at a distance until they stopped near the Ember Lounge. I parked several blocks away and entered separately. The bar was dim, expensive, and determined to make ordinary ice look sophisticated. I chose a booth where I could see the public bar area without approaching them. Vanessa and Victor sat side by side, laughing, touching, and leaning into each other. For months, she had barely smiled at home. Now she was performing happiness loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. I felt a sharp ache when she laughed at something he whispered. Then the feeling changed. It was not jealousy exactly. It was the final collapse of denial. Her confession had been true, and the affair was continuing, even after the divorce filing. I took several photographs and short videos from my seat, capturing the date and location metadata. I also saved the itemized receipt for my own drink to establish when I had been there. I did not record private audio or approach their table. Victor rested a hand on Vanessa's thigh. She leaned toward him and whispered in his ear. Watching them together was less romantic than embarrassing, like observing two people auditioning for a life neither had considered beyond the next drink. Around 9:15, they left the bar. I waited before following them outside. From a public sidewalk, I saw them enter the parking structure next door and kiss near Victor's car beneath a bright security light. I recorded a brief clip, then stopped. I had enough. Sitting in the rental car afterward, I expected to feel shattered. Instead, I felt tired and strangely detached. The images on my phone were not just pain anymore, they were documentation. I had turned months of uncertainty into something that could be dated and verified. I called Caleb after I returned home. "You alive?" he asked. "More productive than alive." "That sounds dangerous." I saw them together. "I have photographs and video from the bar and parking garage." He became serious. "Were you on public property?" "Yes. No tracking devices, no trespassing, no confrontation." "Good. Preserve the original files. Do not edit or send them around." I was hoping for dramatic jazz. "For your private copy, maybe?" The lawyer gets the originals. Caleb came over the following day and helped me export the media without altering the metadata. We created read-only copies, recorded file hashes, and stored the original device backup. For my own amusement, he also made a separate personal edit with black and white footage, soft jazz, and a title card that read, "Based on poor decisions and overpriced wine." It was petty art, and I laughed harder than I had in weeks. But that version remained between us. Rebecca received the untouched files, the receipt, and a written account of when and where I had recorded them. When I delivered the material, Rebecca watched the raw clips without smiling. "This supports the timeline," she said. "More importantly, it may help connect the disputed charges to non-marital spending. We will authenticate what we use and avoid turning the hearing into entertainment." I showed her Caleb's edited version only after the serious discussion. 30 seconds into it, she covered her mouth and shook her head. Is that jazz? Caleb believes evidence benefits from production value. The court will never see this version. I assumed as much. But privately, she said, it is very well edited. That evening, I organized the evidence on our dining table. The table had once held anniversary dinners, holiday meals, and ordinary conversations about work. Now it held bank statements, hotel receipts, screenshots, photographs, and copies of legal correspondence. I separated everything into folders: financial activity, communications, public images, property records, and timeline. The transaction records included rideshare charges to conference hotels, payments to an account associated with Victor, restaurant bills, and a large cosmetics purchase shortly before one of Vanessa's supposed work retreats. None of those items proved the affair alone. Together with her confession and the public footage, they told a coherent story. The messages were worse. Vanessa had left her work tablet connected to our shared home backup months earlier, and after consulting Rebecca, I provided only messages that had lawfully synced into a jointly accessible archive before we separated. I did not search her current private account. The preserved messages included flirtation with Victor, references to hotel stays, and one particularly embarrassing exchange in which he wrote that she made spreadsheets attractive. Her reply suggested he was welcome to help her with data entry after hours. Reading it made me laugh and feel sick at the same time. I printed only the relevant messages and included the original electronic copies in the secure folder. The Ember Lounge receipts matched the dates in several conversations. Hotel confirmations aligned with rideshare charges. The photographs aligned with the same location. Each item strengthened the others. Rebecca had repeatedly reminded me that a strong case did not depend on volume alone. It depended on reliability, lawful access, and a clear explanation of why each record mattered. By midnight, the dining table resembled an accountant's version of a crime board. Baxter sat beside my chair, watching me move papers from one folder to another. When I finally stepped back, I told him, tonight's exhibit is called How to Ruin a Marriage in 10 Easy Transactions. He yawned. I chose to interpret that as professional skepticism. I placed the folders into a large binder with labeled tabs. The first covered the property history. The second traced joint funds. The third contained the affair-related spending. The fourth held the timeline and supporting media. I did not include sarcastic labels in the version Rebecca would use, though my private working copy contained a section called Messages That Aged Like Milk. Humor did not erase the pain, but it helped me look directly at it without becoming consumed. While sorting the papers, I found a note Vanessa had written in 2018. It said, "We would always be each other's person." I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up. Instead, I placed it in a separate box with photographs and other personal items. That promise had once been sincere, at least from my perspective. Destroying the paper would not change what had happened. I was beginning to understand that closure was not the same as pretending the good years had never existed. It meant accepting that the good memories did not excuse what came later. At 1 in the morning, I called Caleb. "Please tell me the house is not on fire," he said sleepily. "No, I finished the binder." "You called me at 1 in the morning to announce office supplies?" "It is more organized than most corporate audits." I sent him a photograph of the neatly arranged folders. He replied, "This belongs in a museum. The Museum of Consequences opens Monday." We laughed until my stomach hurt. When the call ended, I stood alone in the quiet room and realized the case was no longer about proving to myself that Vanessa had betrayed me. I already knew that. The records were about protecting my financial future and ensuring that the legal process was not distorted by denial. For months, I had lived inside her version of reality, where suspicious behavior was stress, lies were misunderstandings, and my discomfort was insecurity. Facts had finally returned the ground beneath my feet. The temporary orders hearing occurred before the final divorce proceedings. Rebecca presented evidence showing the unusual spending, the source of the house down payment, and the need to preserve accounts, while both sides completed financial disclosures. Vanessa's attorney argued that I was overreacting and attempting to punish her. The court did not decide ownership that day. Instead, it prohibited both of us from transferring major assets, limited extraordinary spending, established responsibility for ordinary bills, and confirmed that Vanessa could continue living in the house temporarily while the case moved forward. The vehicle remained available to her under the existing insurance arrangement, but the order required her to make the associated payments if she continued using it. That result was less dramatic than immediate victory, but it was realistic and useful. Vanessa could not drain the accounts, and neither could I. Every major transaction would be visible. Nathan continued tracing funds while Rebecca requested additional records through formal discovery. The morning after the temporary order, Vanessa came into the kitchen expecting coffee again. I was making pancakes for myself, and Baxter was waiting, hopefully, beneath the table. A sealed envelope from Rebecca sat beside Vanessa's place. It contained the filed order, a proposed schedule for property access, and notice that responsibility for the vehicle payment had shifted according to the court's instructions. Vanessa saw the pancakes and briefly smiled. Then she noticed the envelope. "What is that?" "Documents from the hearing." She opened it and read in silence. Her expression changed as she reached the section explaining the vehicle and personal credit accounts. "You are cutting me off!" "No. The court divided temporary responsibilities. You have access to your income and the household account. You are now responsible for the car payment if you continue using it. You know I cannot cover everything. You earn a salary. We are both providing disclosures, and the final division will be decided later. This is punishment. It is separation." She threw the papers onto the table. "You planned this." "I documented what happened and followed legal advice." "You recorded me." "In public, after you admitted the affair and continued charging shared expenses connected to it. You followed me like a stalker. I observed one evening from public places. I did not approach you, track your devices, or interfere with you." Her face reddened. "You are crazy." "No, I am organized." She paced across the kitchen, asking what else I had done. I told her the truth. I had secured my personal accounts, preserved financial records, hired an attorney, and retained an accountant. I had not contacted her employer, published the footage, or told her family. The more calmly I spoke, the angrier she became. "You are punishing me because I made one mistake." "Which mistake? The affair, the repeated spending, the confession, or continuing after the divorce papers arrived?" "It just happened." "So does food poisoning. People still deal with the consequences." She stared at me as though she could not understand why her usual explanations no longer worked. "You are not even angry." "I am angry. I simply do not care enough to perform it for you." "That is cold." "No, Cold was coming home telling me you slept with Victor and saying you would do it again." At the sound of his name, she froze. Until then, I had never said it aloud to her. She realized I knew exactly who he was and how long the financial trail extended. "You went through my private messages. I provided records that were already lawfully available in our shared archive. Anything else was obtained through formal requests. You had no right." "My attorney disagrees. Yours can challenge it." She sat down and pressed both hands against her temples. For the first time, she looked genuinely frightened rather than theatrically wounded. "I have nowhere to go." "You are not being removed today. The temporary order gives you time to arrange housing, but this cannot continue indefinitely." "You are kicking me out of my own home." "The final ownership decision has not been made. Right now, we are separating our lives under a court order." "You want me to move in with Victor?" "I do not care where you move, as long as it complies with the order." Her eyes filled with tears. A month earlier, I would have rushed to comfort her. That morning, I felt grief, but not responsibility. I had loved Vanessa deeply, and seeing her frightened still hurt. Yet, the fear was the result of choices she had made while assuming I would absorb every consequence for her. She looked at the pancakes and said, "You are feeding the dog while our marriage is ending." "I have been feeding him throughout the entire process. He is not responsible for any of this." Baxter thumped his tail, as though grateful to be excluded from the argument. Vanessa stood, grabbed the envelope, and walked toward the bedroom. Before she reached the hallway, she turned. "You will regret doing this." "I already regret staying as long as I did. The rest is damage control." She disappeared behind the bedroom door. I finished breakfast, washed my plate, and sat alone at the table. My hands were shaking slightly. Calm did not mean the conversation had been easy. It meant I had managed not to abandon my boundaries just because she was upset. Within several weeks, Vanessa moved into a furnished apartment. The transition occurred through written agreements between our attorneys, not a dramatic eviction. She collected clothing, personal items, and furniture identified as hers. Rebecca recommended that a neutral third party be present during the final pickup, so Caleb came over and quietly helped document what left the house. Vanessa complained that the process made her feel like a criminal. I told her it was meant to protect both of us from later disputes. After she moved, the house became truly quiet. I expected relief to arrive all at once, but recovery was less cinematic. Some mornings, I felt free. Other mornings, I found one of her hair clips beneath the sink and had to sit down. I kept reaching for my phone when something funny happened, before remembering that she was no longer the person I wanted to tell. I slept badly, ate irregularly, and spent too many evenings reviewing records that had already been reviewed. Rebecca eventually told me to stop treating the case file like a form of emotional self-harm. "Your evidence is preserved," she said. "You do not need to reread it every night." She was right. I placed the binder in a locked cabinet and began rebuilding ordinary routines. I walked Baxter twice a day. I returned to jogging, slowly at first. I accepted Caleb's invitations instead of pretending I preferred isolation. Nathan continued handling the financial analysis, and Rebecca communicated with Vanessa's attorney. Delegating the work allowed me to remember that my identity was larger than the divorce. The financial review uncovered more than I expected. Vanessa had used marital funds for hotel rooms, meals, gifts, transportation, and entertainment connected to Victor. Some transfers were small enough to appear harmless alone, but the pattern covered many months. Nathan prepared a tracing report and separated confirmed personal expenditures from ambiguous charges. Rebecca requested reimbursement for the amount the records could reliably connect to the affair. She did not inflate the numbers or claim that every restaurant bill was misconduct. The house remained the largest issue. Because the original down payment had come mostly from my traceable premarital savings, Rebecca argued that I held a substantial separate property interest. Vanessa's attorney argued that years of marital payments and improvements created a significant marital component. Both positions had merit. The vehicle was simpler because the lease, financing history, and payments were primarily connected to me, though Vanessa had used it regularly. Settlement discussions began, but Vanessa rejected the first proposals. She insisted she deserved half the house without accounting for the separate contribution and denied that the affair expenses should be reimbursed. Her attorney suggested selling the property and dividing the remaining equity. I was willing to refinance and compensate her for the marital share established by the records, but I did not want to sell. The house had been my home before the worst months of the marriage, and I wanted the chance to reclaim it. As negotiations continued, Vanessa's tone shifted. Some messages were angry, others were apologetic. She said Victor had become distant once the divorce created complications. She claimed the affair had never meant what she thought it meant. At one point, she asked whether we could pause the case and try counseling. I read the message several times before forwarding it to Rebecca. "Do you want reconciliation?" Rebecca asked. "No." "Then respond clearly and without cruelty." I wrote, "I am not willing to reconcile. Please direct legal issues through counsel. I wish you well, but my decision is final." Sending that message hurt more than I expected. It closed the door not only on Vanessa, but on the fantasy that she might somehow become the person I had believed her to be. Yet leaving the door open out of nostalgia would only prolong the damage. Several months after the filing, the case reached a final hearing because we had not resolved every property issue. Divorce court was nothing like television. There was no jury gasping at scandalous dialogue, no dramatic music, and no judge waiting to deliver a perfect insult. It resembled a government office where everyone happened to be discussing the collapse of private lives. People sat on hard benches, holding folders. Attorneys whispered over schedules. A clerk called cases, while the judge reviewed documents with the tired concentration of someone managing a crowded docket. Vanessa sat with her attorney several rows ahead of me. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back, and she kept scrolling through her phone without appearing to read anything. Rebecca sat beside me and reviewed our exhibit list one final time. "Remember," she whispered, "this is about property, tracing, and credibility. The judge is not here to punish adultery." "I understand." The clerk called Bennett versus Bennett. We moved to the front. Rebecca presented the property records, Nathan's tracing analysis, bank statements, and authenticated excerpts from the messages and public footage. The affair evidence was introduced only to connect specific expenditures and challenge Vanessa's explanations about the transactions. The court viewed short, unedited clips from the Ember Lounge and parking structure, accompanied by a written timeline. Caleb's jazz version remained safely outside the courtroom. Vanessa's attorney objected to several items and challenged whether the messages had been properly obtained. Rebecca explained the shared archive, the preservation process, and the later formal production. The judge admitted some materials and excluded others that were repetitive or unnecessary. That was not a defeat. Enough remained to establish the pattern. Nathan testified about the source of the house down payment and the later marital contributions. He explained which funds could be traced confidently and which could not. He also summarized the affair-related expenses without exaggeration. Vanessa's attorney questioned him aggressively, suggesting that I had labeled ordinary spending as misconduct because I was bitter. Nathan remained calm and acknowledged where the records were uncertain. His willingness to distinguish facts from assumptions made the reliable portions of his analysis stronger. When Vanessa testified, she admitted the relationship with Victor, but described it as brief and emotionally complicated. She said some hotel and restaurant charges were connected to legitimate work events. Rebecca did not accuse her of lying about every transaction. She focused on the dates where messages, receipts, and footage aligned. Vanessa struggled to explain why joint funds had covered gifts and private hotel stays. She also admitted that she had continued seeing Victor after telling me she would do it again. Her attorney argued that my response had been vindictive. He mentioned the removal of her access to my personal credit account and the documentation of her public conduct. Rebecca produced the notices, temporary orders, and account records showing that ordinary household funds had remained available and that I had followed legal advice rather than secretly draining assets. The judge asked several questions about the vehicle and confirmed that Vanessa had stopped making the required temporary payments after moving out. The leasing company had eventually recovered the vehicle under its contract, after which I had resolved the remaining obligation and obtained a different car in my own name. It was not a theatrical repossession arranged overnight. It was the predictable result of missed payments and a contract in my name. After reviewing everything, the judge issued findings. The house contained both separate and marital components, but the traceable premarital contribution was substantial. I was awarded the property on the condition that I refinance it and satisfy the marital equity amount calculated by the court. Because Vanessa owed reimbursement for documented dissipation of funds and other adjustments, the amount payable to her was significantly reduced. I retained my retirement account, subject to a smaller equalization credit, kept my replacement vehicle, and received the remaining balance of the primary joint account after approved offsets. Vanessa retained her personal accounts, belongings, and a separate portion of marital assets identified during disclosure. It was not literally everything, and it was not because the judge wanted to punish her for cheating. It was, however, the outcome I had hoped for. I kept the house, protected the majority of the assets I had brought into the marriage, recovered part of the money spent on the affair, and left with a clean financial separation. Vanessa's repeated denials and incomplete disclosures had hurt her credibility, while the organized records strengthened mine. When the judge finalized the divorce, I exhaled so deeply that Rebecca glanced at me. "You are officially divorced," she whispered. The words did not make me feel triumphant at first. They made me feel empty, then relieved. The legal system had not restored the years I lost or erased the image of Vanessa with Victor. It had simply created an enforceable ending. Sometimes, that is the closest thing the law can provide to closure. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca handed me a copy of the final order. "You handled yourself well," she said. "I owe you coffee." "You owe me several coffees, but your invoice will be more specific." I laughed. After months of speaking through documents and formal emails, the ordinary joke felt like sunlight. I called Caleb from the courthouse steps. "Tell me the judge watched the jazz edit," he said. The judge watched the raw footage like a responsible adult. "So my artistic contribution remains unrecognized." Rebecca privately called it well edited. "I am adding that to my resume. I kept the house." Caleb shouted loudly enough that several people turned toward me. "That is what I wanted to hear. I have to refinance and pay the adjusted marital share, but yes, it is mine." "And the marriage?" "Finished. Then we celebrate." That evening, Caleb and I went to a rooftop bar with overpriced drinks and strings of lights hanging above the tables. He raised his glass. "To new beginnings. And properly documented endings," I added. We laughed. It was the first celebration in months that did not feel forced. Halfway through the evening, my phone buzzed. Vanessa had sent a message. "You ruined me." I looked at it for several seconds. The old version of me might have written a paragraph explaining every way she had ruined herself. "Instead," I replied, "I did not create your choices. I documented their consequences." Then, I turned the phone face down. Caleb asked whether it was her. "Yes." "Do you feel better?" "Not because I answered. I feel better because I do not need her to agree." On the walk home, I passed the bakery where Vanessa and I used to buy pastries on Saturday mornings. Warm bread and sugar drifted through the open doorway. For a moment, nostalgia tightened my throat. I remembered laughing with her at a corner table, before our relationship became a collection of suspicions and excuses. The memory did not disappear, but it no longer controlled me. I stood outside for a few seconds, then continued home. Baxter greeted me as though I had returned from war instead of a bar. I clipped on his leash and took him for a late walk. He investigated every bush with complete dedication, tail raised, entirely unconcerned with property division or emotional betrayal. Watching him reminded me that life continued through small routines whether I felt ready or not. "We did it," I told him. "The case is over." He barked once. I am choosing to interpret that as approval. Back at the house, I poured one final drink and played soft jazz in the living room, partly because it made me think of Caleb's ridiculous video. Baxter climbed onto the couch and rested his head on my leg. I looked around the room and realized the space no longer felt like the scene of a failed marriage. It felt like my home again. A month later, peace had become my favorite background noise. I had refinanced the house, transferred utilities into my name, and replaced the furniture Vanessa had taken. The rooms looked emptier, but they also looked honest. There were no hidden hotel charges, no unexplained late meetings, and no arguments designed to make me doubt what I had seen. My mornings consisted of coffee, breakfast, a walk with Baxter, and work. Some days, that simplicity felt more luxurious than anything I had owned during the marriage. Then Vanessa's sister Monica sent me an invitation to a family gathering for Vanessa's birthday. Her message said, "You are welcome, but please be civil." I stared at the invitation for a long time. Attending was not necessary for closure, and Rebecca would have advised me to stay away from unnecessary conflict. Curiosity, however, remained one of my weaker qualities. Monica and I had always gotten along, and several members of Vanessa's family still contacted me occasionally. Against my better judgment, I accepted. The gathering took place in Monica's heavily decorated suburban living room. Balloons covered one wall, food crowded the dining table, and guests filled the room with the strained cheerfulness of people aware that an unresolved scandal might arrive at any moment. Vanessa froze when she saw me. "Ethan," she said, forcing a smile. "I did not think you would come." I received an invitation. Her mother approached and asked both of us to behave like adults. I assured her I had no intention of starting an argument. At that point, I genuinely planned to remain polite, give Monica the gift I had brought for the household, and leave after an hour. Then Victor arrived with his wife. I had not known he would be there. Apparently, Vanessa had told her family that Victor remained a respected colleague and that rumors about their relationship had been exaggerated during an ugly divorce. His wife, Claire, seemed uneasy but unaware of the full evidence. Vanessa's expression changed the moment she realized both of us were in the room. Victor avoided looking at me. I should have walked away. Instead, months of restrained anger rose at once. Vanessa had continued rewriting the story, presenting herself as the victim of a vindictive former husband, while Victor's wife stood beside the man who had betrayed her. I still had an audio recording Vanessa had voluntarily sent during the case after one of our arguments. In it, she mocked my cooking, compared me with Victor, and admitted that the affair had continued. The recording had not been necessary for the property decision, but it was authentic and legally preserved. When Vanessa asked what gift I had brought her, I held up my phone. "Just a memory," I said. I connected it to the room's Bluetooth speaker and played a short portion. Vanessa's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "Victor tastes better than anything my husband ever made, and I am tired of pretending I regret it." The room went silent. Someone near the buffet dropped a fork. Vanessa lunged toward the speaker. "Turn that off." I stopped the recording after the single statement. "You told everyone the affair was exaggerated," I said. "It was not." Claire turned toward Victor. "Is that you she is talking about?" Victor began saying that the recording lacked context. It was the worst possible defense because no context could transform Vanessa's statement into something innocent. Claire threw the wine in her glass directly into his face. He stumbled backward, coughing and wiping his eyes while insisting that things were not what they sounded like. "They sound exactly like what they are," Claire said. Vanessa's mother gasped and lowered herself heavily into a chair. Monica shouted at everyone to calm down and then, noticing that her mother had nearly fallen against the birthday cake, added, "Please, not on the buttercream." The absurdity of the sentence broke the room's stunned silence. Several people began talking at once. Victor blamed Vanessa. Vanessa accused him of lying to her. Claire demanded his phone. Monica demanded that I disconnect from the speaker. I did so immediately. Standing in the middle of the chaos, I realized I had crossed from disclosure into public retaliation. Part of me felt satisfied. Another part recognized that the scene was not the mature closure I had been trying to build. I had exposed a lie, but I had also chosen the most explosive possible setting. Rather than remain and justify myself, I apologized to Monica for disrupting her home and walked outside. The night air felt cool against my face. Behind me, voices continued rising through the closed door. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. I did not regret that Claire finally knew the truth, but I regretted turning the information into a birthday performance. Revenge could be entertaining, but it was not the same as healing. That distinction stayed with me long after the laughter and shouting faded. The recording circulated among people at Victor's workplace, though I did not post it online. Claire confronted him privately and later separated from him. An internal review at his company examined the relationship because he had supervised Vanessa and approved expenses connected to some of their trips. I was not part of that investigation and did not attempt to influence it. From what I eventually heard, Victor lost his management position after the company concluded that he had violated its conflict of interest and expense policies. Vanessa had already left the company during the divorce and struggled for a while to find comparable work. Those outcomes were not magic punishments delivered by the universe. They followed from decisions both of them had made in a workplace relationship involving authority, secrecy, and questionable spending. Monica did not speak to me for several weeks after the birthday. When she finally called, she said she understood why I wanted the truth known, but hated the way I had done it. I told her she was right. I apologized without adding excuses. She accepted the apology cautiously, and we agreed that future contact should not involve discussions about Vanessa. That boundary allowed us to remain civil, without pretending the family gathering had been harmless. Vanessa sent several furious messages, accusing me of destroying her reputation. I did not answer. I forwarded anything potentially threatening to Rebecca, but most of the messages were anger rather than danger. Eventually, they stopped. I blocked Vanessa on social media and limited communication to the one email address reserved for final administrative matters. Once the refinance, insurance changes, and remaining tax documents were completed, there was almost nothing left to discuss. People sometimes asked whether I regretted the marriage. The honest answer was complicated. I regretted the years I spent explaining away behavior that made me unhappy. I regretted how often I treated my instincts as flaws, simply because Vanessa disliked being questioned. I regretted the public birthday reveal because it momentarily turned me into the kind of person who needed an audience for someone else's humiliation. But I did not regret filing for divorce. I did not regret documenting the finances, hiring professionals, or refusing to compete for a woman who had already abandoned the partnership. Caleb continued joking that my story should become a podcast called Heartbreak and Hard Drives. Nathan occasionally emailed me financial reminders and still teased me about the emotional damage column. Rebecca checked in once after the final paperwork was complete and asked whether I was emotionally solvent. I told her I was improving. With the daily chaos gone, ordinary life slowly returned. I started jogging regularly instead of using one difficult run as proof that I had transformed overnight. Some mornings I managed 3 miles. Other mornings I walked most of the route and considered that enough. I cooked again, though my first attempts at pancakes were uneven and occasionally burned. Baxter never complained. I invited friends over without worrying that Vanessa would create tension or disappear halfway through the evening. I repainted the bedroom and moved back into it after months of sleeping elsewhere. That simple act felt more significant than the court order. Vanessa's old mug remained in the cabinet for a while. It said, "Boss Lady" in gold letters. Every time I saw it, I thought about how many warning signs I had ignored because they appeared inside ordinary routines. Eventually, I packed the mug with the remaining photographs and placed the box in storage. I did not need to display the cost of blind trust every morning. Remembering the lesson did not require keeping the wound on the counter. The best parts of my new life were small. My coffee tasted the way I made it. The Wi-Fi password belonged only to me. No unfamiliar hotel charges appeared in my account. When my phone buzzed late at night, it was usually Caleb sending a terrible joke rather than Vanessa announcing that she would be home eventually. Baxter slept beside the couch, entirely loyal and wonderfully uninterested in office politics. For a long time, I thought revenge would be the reward at the end of the story. It was not. Revenge gave me several satisfying moments, one regrettable birthday scene, and enough material for Caleb's imaginary podcast. Peace was the real reward. Peace was waking up without checking whether someone had lied to me. It was knowing where my money went, trusting the silence in my house, and no longer measuring my worth against the attention of a woman who had chosen someone else. Every now and then, I remembered the sentence Vanessa delivered that first night. I would do it again. I believed her. More importantly, I finally believed myself when I said I would leave again, under the same circumstances. Not because I enjoyed dismantling a marriage, and not because I wanted to win, but because staying would have required me to betray my own dignity. These days, the only thing beside me when I wake up is usually Baxter, waiting impatiently for breakfast. My life is quieter, my finances are simpler, and my home no longer feels like a place where I have to investigate the person sleeping next to me. Vanessa's confession destroyed the future I thought I had, but it also ended the confusion that had kept me trapped. She expected her betrayal to break me. Instead, it forced me to stop bargaining with reality. I did not walk away untouched. I walked away informed, humbled, and finally willing to protect my peace. And unlike the marriage I spent years trying to save, that peace has never asked me to ignore the truth.